Welcome to the Real Estate Syndication Show. Whether you are a seasoned investor or building a new real estate business, this is the show for you. Whitney Sewell talks to top experts in the business. Our goal is to help you master real estate syndication. And now your host, Whitney Sewell.
This is your daily real estate syndication show. I'm your host, Whitney Sewell. Today our guest is Meg Epstein. Thanks for being on the show, Meg.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I haven't had too many guests that are able to record a show from a boat. So I'm happy to have you on, and thank you for your effort to make it happen, even though you all are enjoying the water.
Yeah, we're in quarantine.
That's one way to do it. That's awesome. A little about Meg before we get started. She founded CA South in 2015 with the idea of bringing to Nashville her sense of design and style of building honed from her days in construction, California. The CA South raised its first dedicated commingled fund in early 2019. The firm expanded beyond residential condos to include industrial and office projects. She has been involved in the development of construction of over 260,000 square feet of residential and commercial real estate, representing over $150 million worth to date. She is a licensed commercial general contractor, licensed residential general contractor, CCIM candidate, and licensed real estate agent. Meg, you've got all the certifications, that's for sure, and lots of experience to go along with it. But give us a little more about who you are, and let's dive in.
Sure. I definitely came in, to real estate development and fund management the opposite way. I didn't come from, I wasn't an analyst in New York or something, and I started on job sites out of college and really learned construction and building, and slowly worked my way up. And when I moved to Nashville, I just knew I had to do commercial real estate, and there were so many gaps in the market and undersupplied aspects. So that's when I started my company about 5 years ago now, and really dedicated to changing the built environment in Nashville, really doing great, interesting projects that appeal to, more modern tastes and things like that. Try to build something better than, every project that goes up and out there.
Yeah. Wow. So no doubt that, that building a business like that doesn't come easy, right? I mean, it doesn't come just overnight. No doubt about it. You've worked very hard. But tell me, let's go in a little bit to just starting a fund like that, or starting your own business, and maybe you could give us, and I think too, you could speak to the women that are listening. Unfortunately, I don't get too many women guests, so I'm thankful to have you on. But maybe you can speak to them and just starting your business, and because you don't meet too many women contractors either, and so I'm just grateful that for your time and being willing to just share your success and expertise. But can you just share with them a little bit about just getting started and in that time where you talked about it taking, or you said you slowly worked your way up, what was some of the things that helped you to build that success?
Sure. So I guess it wouldn't be slow relatively, right? Because I'm not very old yet, and I have quite a bit under management. But I basically started the first way I got my feet wet on my own was by doing a house flip, and I did it with a developer that was very familiar with doing. He'd done other house flips, and I just basically found a mentor. And I think I raised a little bit of capital on it, and I went on bigger pockets and, got a few people to put in 50 grand, 100 grand. And we did a house flip in California. And I was at the time I started working as a GC for a GC, building really high-end homes. And so I understood construction and the general parameters, but he, basically just got a mentor to do that. And then when I moved to Nashville, and then I did that for several years. I also had a day job as an owner's representative. So I was, having my normal bills paid. And then when I moved to Nashville, I saw the opportunity to do commercial, and it just helps not being in California where it's so competitive and expensive, and people are just so friendly in Nashville. And I found my first project by running along the river, and I thought, gosh, why is no one building anything on the river in Nashville? There's just, waterfront's a big deal in many other cities, Chicago and San Francisco, everywhere I'd come from. And I thought, why is there nothing on the river? And I saw this, and I was on a bike ride, and I saw the sign, and it said for sale by owner, residential condo building, for sale by owner. And I called him, and the long story short is that he was a developer and he needed $1 million. And I partnered with him, became 50-50 partners, and he kind of walked me through the whole process. And I went out and raised the capital from, just whoever I could find, bigger pockets everywhere. I was like, I can give you $1 million. And I had no idea where I was going to get it, but I just figured it out. And that was the first deal. Yeah.
So you called a for sale by owner sign, and then ultimately partnered with that developer. Right. And
he was an older guy. He was also from Los Angeles, but he moved in Nashville. He had plans and a pro forma, and, he kind of just walked me through it. I ended up buying it fully later. I ended up buying him out of it, and I developed it. I'm developing it still myself, but it was definitely a learning experience. That's how I got started.
Wow. Okay. So, then talking about raising that capital a little bit, most people are terrified of just raising for the first deal. And you were, you call it for sale by owner sign, you meet this developer, and it sounds like you seen the opportunity there and you didn't hesitate.
Yeah. I mean, I would have, now that I, have a fund and I work with much bigger private equity groups and legitimate capital sources, I definitely probably didn't do everything correctly. And I'm sure the legal was shoddy, and now I have a whole team of attorneys that
Sure.
police everything, but it definitely got my feet wet, and understood the basic parameters of contracts and things like that. And really, once you do it once, I think that's why it can be, because I remember before then it seemed so intimidating, and now I have 10 or so projects going, and it just is, you do it once, it's so much easier to confront a bigger project or something like that.
Yeah. So, I guess fill us in a little bit on just the hustle that took. I mean, that's definitely took a lot to get that started in your first deal. What are some steps or some things you could highlight to help somebody else that's looking for that first opportunity like that?
I think that, what I would recommend, I mean, it really comes down to who you're doing business with. I found that I've worked with I've been the sponsor myself. Now I've worked with other sponsors, and it really makes all the difference. So you really should get to know, I mean, that guy, I had no idea who he was. I went to his house. He had a nice house. He was 70 years old. He looked like a responsible guy. I just assumed he knew what he was doing. And, I'll spare you the details, but it was very messy, and, but it worked out great, and it got me started. So I have no regrets, but I would say that, you really have to do your due diligence on someone. It's definitely worth hiring an investigator to do your background checks on people before you go into business with them. And in terms of hustling, I did a lot of cold calling when I first started, and I still do actually. I cold call family offices now, or, have more, or private equity groups, and that's who I raise capital from. But when I first started, I would literally just went online and, real estate investors, Nashville, and just called as many people as I could. And I really think that it's a lost art, and that people don't reach out to enough people. And yeah.
You mentioned raising capital from family offices by cold calling them. That's not something I've heard anybody talk about on the show. Could you talk about that a little bit? And how does that work? I mean, just cold calling family offices, and what does that conversation look like?
No, I don't mean, I wouldn't recommend that, especially with family offices, because I just meant people cold calling investors. I mean, when I started, I did not know the difference between, an institutional investor and a high net worth investor, and what it meant to be, like, who you could raise capital from. I didn't know any of that. I literally just Googled Nashville real estate investors, or, something like that. And I just started calling people and networking around town. And so I just mean that I even still find a lot of value in blocking out some of my weeks just to reach out to people and, basically find prospects for investment.
Yeah. Wow. So,
And
in your bio a little bit, you had talked about just having a different perspective to real estate development. Could you just elaborate on that perspective a little bit and what that means?
Sure. I think I found, especially coming from California, when I moved to the South, one, there was a gap in the architectural style. There wasn't a lot of modern, clean lines, and I in fact met one of my main development partners is an architect and a builder, and he's also a developer, and he is from San Diego, and he kind of helped bring in a lot of my projects that very modern, cool, California architecture. And so I think that has definitely been a part of our success in just bringing a different perspective. I also, we tend to be a younger team, whereas I did, when I first got to Nashville, I kind of made the rounds, very small town. So, you want to know someone in real estate, it's 1 degree of separation. So, and I noticed that a lot of people were really good, or they had family businesses and they're really good at doing one thing like office, and that was all that they did, and that was all their whole, and that's the one thing they focused on, which is really great, but it left a lot of, and they were very traditional, not opportunistic asset classes, and it left a lot of room in the market, and that was sort of what I've exploited.
Wow. Tell me other ways that maybe you've been able to do things differently, in a market like Nashville, I mean, coming from California or, the coast.
I think my first focus was bringing in capital it was just in the beginning when I first started, it was like 2014, 2015. Obviously now Nashville is much more of a buzzy, investor. It almost seems to be played at this point. But when I first moved there, there's more there's more national investors doing multifamily and hospitality, but it wasn't as many people from New York investing in Chicago, and now that's a lot, but that was my focus, was bringing in outside capital. But to do that, you have to have really buttoned down, underwriting and real market studies and things like that. When I noticed, when I first started looking at deals in Nashville, was very a country club, back and napkin type underwriting that just wouldn't attract those investors. And so I think that was kind of one of the ways that I got bigger checks, which is also a point I'll probably make later.
Wow. So just really seeming to be more sophisticated anyway, having better tools.
Yeah, and better underwriting. And to be honest, the first guy I hired used to work at Goldman. I hired him off Upwork. I paid him $100 an hour, and he built my super complicated models that I couldn't understand either. But he knew he was smart, and I knew he knew how to do it. So it was definitely, now I know I can read models and,
Sure.
Understand them, and learned a lot since then. But it doesn't mean you have to have some big, team either.
So what's been the hardest part of this, the syndication process for you?
I actually don't think the syndication process is that hard. I think that I've never had a problem putting bigger deals together. I find a lot more efficiency in putting, 30 million plus projects together. It's much less work than a $5 million deal. And that's something that I think your listeners should know, or a lot of people in the bigger pockets type space tend to overlook. I think just because they can't conceptualize it, but it's actually a lot easier. I'm not afraid of someone taking my big secret, because no one really listens when I say that. But but it does, that's been something, really having the discipline to stick to the niche of your size deal that you do best at, and mine is 30 to 60 million. And honestly, I opened my own private equity fund last year, and I really think at least this current situation, what's happening with, the pandemic and everything, could change this, but where people might want to be more diversified. But it's a lot easier to raise capital from family offices and private equity into direct projects right now, as opposed to a fund. So that's been something that I particularly don't take several checks into one deal. I only take funds into my private equity fund, specific individual checks. But I find that it's a lot easier to raise capital into individual deals if you have, dollar for dollar anyway.
Yeah, because I guess then they can see the property, they can see the market, they can go look at it if they want to, as opposed to not knowing what types of deals it's going to be invested in.
Right. Yeah, and it's for me. I partnering with a private equity group or using the fund, the fund I set up, or they have pluses and minuses, and I really don't mind either. So, it's kind of the path of least resistance to do individual. Just depends. So.
Sure. What's some ways that a lot of times I'll ask, how do people prepare for a potential downturn? But, now since we're kind of in the middle of one potentially, where how were you prepared for this kind of downturn?
Yeah. So surprisingly, I don't want to say I planned for it or I was thinking with it, but I was very lucky because I set up a credit facility debt fund for my own projects, not to operate as a debt fund, but just for my own credit facility, essentially, in case. And that was one thing that really helped me in getting my projects out of the ground. So I started when doing condos, and they're horribly undersupplied in Nashville or in other southeastern cities because they're a lot harder to finance than multifamily. You have to do pre-sales, and I didn't want to do luxury condos. I wanted to be selling to people for the $350,000 price point. Those people aren't buying condos 2 years in advance. And so I figured out I built relationships with different funding sources that didn't require pre-sales, and that's been one of my very successful actions in selling out some of my projects. One project we just, almost we're 80% sold when we opened it.
Wow.
We didn't have to sell 30 or 40% of it before we broke ground. Well, I set up my own credit facility to be able to fund my projects, which ends up, if the credit market freezes, or right now, I don't think a lot of banks are lending. All my projects closed. I just closed 2 very large construction loans in the last 2 weeks, and we're, well underway. So that was one way I prepared. The other way is, the other obvious ways are, that basically gives you control of the whole capital stack, which always helps. Your partners, I have amazing partners that have been through this themselves. And I have an incredible board that is, several generations older than me that has been mentoring me and kind of giving me their advice with what they've seen. But it's the basic stuff, which is don't over leverage. And my projects tend to be very opportunistic. So I'm looking for very high yields, 20, 30, 40% IRRs. And so if it takes me a little bit longer, a year or 2 longer, I'm still not losing principal. It might not be as profitable, but my asset classes are, and my projects are, I really shop and find the right project, and it has to have a lot of spread. I'm not building into something at a 6 or 6.5 cap and selling it, 4.5 cap or 5 cap or something. So, I think because I really pick and choose and I focus on niche asset classes, that if it's, as long as I can hold the project long enough to get through it, which I can, then I think that's fine. I think people just make the mistake of over leveraging and, getting into mezz debt and things like that.
Nice. It seems like a common theme that I've heard you talk about was really the experts you've surrounded yourself from the very beginning, whether it was that, the guy, the for sale by owner, the guy that's been doing it a long time, to the guy from Goldman Sachs, to now the team, the board that you're talking about. It sounds like you're good at finding people that are really good at these things, and surrounding yourself with experts. It seems like so important to anybody that's had so much success in real estate. But what's a way that you've recently improved your business that we could apply to ours?
I think that we've recently, I mean, the board is a new development, and I think that a lot of people don't do that enough. I basically reached out on LinkedIn to people that aren't, that I basically like, oh, I want my company to be like that. One guy's had 8 funds. He lives in New York. One is one of my main investors, just people that are have done this, and, they're on my board, and I give everybody a little piece of the back end of all of my profits to keep everyone, motivated and on the same page. And so I don't want to pay monthly stipends or something like a traditional board, but that's definitely been something that's been helpful, especially when going into something like this. You really feel like you have a competent team. And then I think I've been, I keep my team really lean and mean, but I found the right people that are just really intelligent and have given me the ability to compartmentalize my time. Because I think as a developer or a syndicator, or a lot of the people listening, what's really easy to do is do you end up kind of doing everything. And I would say that in order to scale, instead of doing one project, I'd rather be doing 8 or 9 projects at once than doing one big, one project by myself, and have that diversity in case different things go wrong in different asset classes. Then I see a lot of developers just focus on one project at a time, and they do that for like 4 or 5 years, and it's basically them and maybe an assistant, and they hire everything out. And I've kind of chosen a different model, which is to build a proper, team, lean and mean still, not a ton of overhead, but be able to scale that way. So to give diversity and diversification.
Yeah, love that. And maybe this goes into the next question, but I like to ask, what was the number one thing that's contributed to your success?
I think it has to be the people and aligning, making sure everyone's aligned for the same goals. I have a handful of really great partners that I just couldn't, we've just worked really well together. And I think that's the point. And sometimes that, you go through, like the first deal I did, that didn't end up being the best partnership. I learned a lot, but you have to just find the right people. I mean, I think that sounds a little cliche, but so I'm trying to think of something more specific, but I think it's just about, finding the right people and making sure everyone's interests are aligned,
Yeah.
Even down to the contractor, even if they get a little cut in the, some bonus or something in the end. I think that's important.
It's really just like an abundance mentality, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow. Well, Meg, I'm very grateful for your time. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but tell the listeners how you like to give back.
I've noticed that there's a lot. So Nashville's very pro-development, which is really great because I'm a developer, but I also think it's really important to, shape parks and recreation and the greenways. And so I'm very involved in the community in that way. I'm also a part of a women's entrepreneur group that basically helps women scale their companies and get to more employees. So I do a lot of mentoring through that. I'm always trying to help women in real estate and commercial real estate or just entrepreneurship because, especially in different various parts of the country, it's, you tend to be misconceived.
Yeah. Wow. Well, how can people get in touch with you and learn more about you?
Sure. You can email, my website is casouthdevelopment.com, and there's a contact email on there, assistant@casouthdevelopment.com, and that'll get routed.
Thank you for listening to the Real Estate Syndication Show, brought to you by LifeBridge Capital. LifeBridge Capital works with investors nationwide to invest in real estate, while also donating 50% of its profits to assist parents who are committing to adoption. LifeBridge Capital, making a difference, one investor and one child at a time. Connect online at www.lifebridgecapital.com for free material and videos to further your success.